How you know? Black with a bucket, I could be a vampire. And then with some run, bite your, and hear your song. What you say, girl? Bite your tongue. I'm ball out, alright. Yeah, I'm haunted. I'm still rolling. Oh, I'm in haunted house and moving to, and vampires do exist.
New Orleans. The city was founded in 1718 and acquired by the United States from France in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. It's an extraordinary city that looks and feels unlike any other place in America. People visit in order to view the architecture, walk through the French Quarter, ride the streetcar, eat unique foods, and party at Mardi Gras. Increasingly, people visit to view, dress up as, take tours about, and even celebrate vampires.
Bite her.
Greg! See what happens?
Vampires are hotter than ever in the 21st century. They're featured in increasing amounts of books, films, and online games, and vampire subcultures are burgeoning. In New Orleans, it's actually difficult to avoid references to vampires, and of course, to the queen of vampire fiction, Anne Rice. Behind me is the former Garden District residence of Anne Rice. It's famous to Rice fans because she used it as the fictitious home of the Mayfair witches in her novels. Tour companies stop here all the time to point out the former Anne Rice house. And apparently, when she was still in residence, hundreds of fans would camp out here on a Sunday waiting for Rice to emerge on her way to church. Although Rice has temporarily left vampire fiction, her fans are still loyal. Each year, the Anne Rice Vampire Lestat fan club holds their famous Vampire Ball. It is preceded by a wine tasting event. Sadly, I didn't get the message that costumes were optional for the event.
I got new appreciation for women who wear corsets, because this is not nice, let me tell you.
At the wine tasting, I spoke to numerous fans, including fan club president and ball organizer, Miss Sue Quiroz.
When we first did the fan club, we walked up to her at a book signing for Queen of the Damned, and we said, "Oh, we've been kind of kicking around the idea of, doing a fan club for you." And she says, "Oh, well, Lestat would just love that, So, his ego. Actually, I was her secretary, the very first one that, she had.
This has been a huge part of your life.
It has been. That was 15 years, a big chunk of my life, and it was very exciting and challenging, which is what I like. Of course, I don't do anything in a small way, so I have to do it big. It's a love that I do for the fan club and the fans, and people would miss it, because they actually did, and I heard all their complaints, while I was at the Anne Rice collection. So I know they want it, so I provide it. We have a whole lot that are out of the country even.
Really?
Yes. We have a girl coming from Germany.
I am from Houston, Texas.
Raleigh, North Carolina.
So, New Orleans every year?
Just about every year for the last 12 years.
I'm originally from Austin, Texas, and I've been living with my husband Scott and Miles in Jackson, Mississippi for the past 6 years.
I've been involved since 1990. This is my 10th ball. Now I'm in Chicago.
Oh, me? She drugged me kicking and screaming in '94. And I've been hooked ever since.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we must come. We come every year.
Oh, and where do you come from?
We actually come from France.
I am interested to know what you guys make of this phenomenon.
This is a very big phenomenon. Look at all these beautiful girls out here. Look at them. Film them. Come on.
Ladies, say hi.
This is a big event. Anne Rice, she does it big. If she don't do it unless she does it big.
Listen, we don't drink more when we work. Business is strictly business. Y'all come here to have a good night. We're gonna let y'all have a good night. Great city, New Orleans.
Anne Rice fans, vampire literature fans, subcultural vampires, and even interested tourists were at the ball. The theme this year was the witching hour, which had no bearing on the amount of fangs that were present. Those portraying the elegant undead tend to go all out for the ball, creating costumes that dazzle in their originality, detail, and sense of fun.
Well, we've tried to put things together from a couple of Ren fairs, and Hot Topic's always a good place for some exotic things. And we've had our vampire teeth made here in New Orleans a couple of times. So Mari's got some fresh ones in her mouth today. Looking good.
They were made by Maven. They're the teeth from Interview with the Vampire.
Always enjoy a good costume, and I can tell you this is one of the best balls that I've been to. Almost everyone is in costume, and it's like an endless parade of beauty. Who wouldn't want an extra 100 years to accessorize the perfect outfit?
Fabulous costume.
Well, I like to do costuming stuff, it's my passion, and I'm really into the Renaissance. And I've never done a Royals Renaissance costume, so I decided this year I was going to do a Royals costume.
I guess I'm a little bit of a Victorian Lestat with a little bit of a punk edge, I guess. And it's very hot. That's my costume.
I feel underdressed actually now that I got here. I feel bad because everybody's so beautiful. It's amazing. Everybody really went all out on their outfit, especially the keyboard player with the feathers. It's great. It's beautiful. So
you like the elegance of the vampire?
I do, actually. I do. I feel really, I need to go change. Actually, I'm going to do that now, actually. I'm going to go change.
I am not fanged, no, but I feel naked tonight without fangs.
We are really, really old vampires, and when you get to be like over 400, you don't have to have fangs anymore. So that's kind of our story.
I wish I had my fangs tonight. I really do.
People come to the ball for a variety of reasons, including camaraderie, enjoyment, and escape.
You know, when you live in suburbia, you kind of have to try and fit in to keep your job and all of that. So
I live in a really small community. There is none of that.
Yeah.
None of that.
Oh no.
So what do your friends and family think of your obsession?
I don't think a lot of them understand, but they humor me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And we get to let our freak flag fly for Halloween.
Actually, 2 years ago, I was reading one author's webpage, Laura K. Hamilton, and it said that she was going to be at the Anne Rice Vampire Lestat Ball, and I thought, there's one of those?
And then I found Anne Rice's novels after that, but I really just liked the themes and everything that kind of went on with it. It's sort of like it's very sexy, it's a struggle at the same time between good and evil. Like kind of, I think it resonates with everybody. It's like, where do you fit in the world? And vampires have that same sort of situation. It's like, where do we belong? We're all looking for that.
Most of the people that attend events like this and that are willing to put time, money, and effort into it are either artists or gamers or IT people, people with imagination, and people who like to innovate, and people who have the courage to live a little bit outside the edge.
Numerous books in the urban paranormal genre have recently been published and gained a multitude of fans. Anne Rice is no longer the only vampire fiction writer using New Orleans as a setting and bringing vampire enthusiasts to town.
So the ideal is that I get to read all these different ones, but I'm always adding another one. I know at the store the other day, I'd walked into Walgreens and noticed that about 7 of the books on the shelf were all vampire books.
It's blowing up. There's no question.
It really is. I like the new twist a lot of the authors do, where some of the vampires only go after those people that are like mass murderers, serial killers. She's heard myself and several other friends talk about Anne Rice for years, so she knows about all the characters. Even if she hasn't read all the books, she knows the characters because I keep talking about them, and she'll be like, what friend of this is? What friend is this?
Is that real?
They really are. I mean, the thing about it is it becomes a history that you know that history better than some of the history we know from school. So so it becomes such a part of our life because we care about the characters. We want to know what happens. And I think sometimes it's that escape for what we wish we could be.
Oh gosh, yes. I like Christine Feehan. She has a new take on the Carpathian, In Love With. And of course, Sherilyn Kenyon. I love her stuff with the Dark Hunter and Dream Hunter series. And then of course, Anne Rice.
And actually, I think my love of vampires started with Anne's books. And then, she eventually quit writing the Vampire Chronicles. But, before she ended, Laurel kind of picked up, and then others kind of followed. And so now you have, an amazing group of writers out there right now who are writing really good stories. I mean, it's not all about, sex and lust. I mean, there's a good backstory. These characters are interesting. There's good character development.
But I've always loved the darker subculture, vampires, werewolves, anything that's not what I would go outside with Hazy Green, Alabama and see. The vampire, Anne Rice for one, the way she writes, she brought me into New Orleans. I was here, and it was a place that was not Hazy Green, Alabama, where I did not want to be. And these vampires became my friends. It's fighting people and doing these things I didn't see as weird or taboo because my friends were doing it and it was okay. And as I started reading Laurel and Sherilyn Kenyon and everybody, it's just different cultures and different worlds, and it's exciting, and it's not Hazy Green, Alabama. Yes. It's a friendship. You can't just go to school and make a friend and have that friend go, well, I read these books and I love them, and these characters are so alive to me, and they're going to look at you kind of strangely if they don't share. But with us, we know that we share the same ideas, we like the same things, and it's so comfortable.
Well, I mean, between Anne's books and then Sherilyn's books, I mean, it's just, this city's so romantic anyways. How can you come here and not fall in love with the city? Yep. And to envision, romantic creatures such as vampires, I mean, it's just, I don't know, you step foot on this ground and something resonates. It's magic.
So what are you doing out here in New Orleans?
I'll be doing an annual convention that I came down for, KCON, and of course I had to hit the ball.
Oh yes.
If you're coming this time of year, you have to be here.
Now, can you tell me what you think it is about vampires that attracts your fans so much?
Everything. I think it's the idea of sleep all day, party all night, and look great forever.
That's pretty basic. But you twisted the vampire. How did you create the vampire in your own,
That was an interesting little quirk of fate. At the time, I was a reporter for a local paper, and we were doing articles on the origins of different Halloween myths, and I was also taking a Greek mythology class. And as I was talking to my professor about vampirism going back to ancient Greece, the idea for the Dark Hunters just snapped into place. My mother was a huge horror fan, and I was raised around vampires and werewolves. My mother used to love to scare every kid in the neighborhood.
Vampire culture in New Orleans transcends both the ball and literary fandom.
Yes, we like to think of it as the place where vampires come to shop. So we have a lot of unusual things, a lot of really elegant things, a lot of wine accessories, because we have a vineyard in Transylvania, Romania, where we make our vampire wine. And we actually are moving the wine to California now because we wanted to make it even better wine. But we have vampire vodkas and just things we think that people from the nocturnal lifestyle would enjoy. But also, even in the 1800s, vampires were here. And people believed that they were really vampires, and they killed whole families of people. It's a great place for vampires to prey on because people come here and they lose themselves. They don't even know where they are in the streets, even though it's just a square grid. It's very confusing. They drink a lot, and a lot of people disappear here. So it's a great place for vampires to come and enjoy themselves. Well, right now we have fangs being made for the big Anne Rice party and also for the Endless Night event. And so we have two different artists doing beautiful, beautiful fangs. They're reusable fangs, and they're quite expensive, but really, if you're into the whole, look, it's a really nice thing.
And what about people looking for vampires?
you run across that?
Yes, we do. And many times, in fact, our perfume is a big seller because of that. Our perfume is something that, it comes with a scroll about vampires' attraction to roses. And so many people buy the perfume because they want to attract vampires. We even have perfume pendants so you can wear it around your neck, and you'd be surprised. We've sold a ton today just because people want to attract vampires, and why, I don't know.
Men and women?
Men and women.
I thought I'd try the perfume out in the French Quarter to see if any vampires were attracted. Apparently, large amounts of alcohol eliminate the effects of vampire-attracting perfume. If the real vampires wouldn't come to me, I'd go to them.
I was always into the weird stuff, but I was the normal kid. I was the khaki-wearing sports kid in high school and college, but playing football and soccer and hockey and lacrosse and all that stuff. But I had a dark streak in me. Then in 1992, I was in a Dungeons and Dragons, and I went to this one D&D live action game, and this girl says, "I'm going to play this game called Vampire." I was like, "What's this about?" And we were seeing, then she killed my character. But the gaming stuff didn't appeal to me as much as I thought. And I met all these people, and I was working as a dental technician in college. But the gaming didn't satisfy me. It was like my premature kind of thing. But there's something about the vampire that I fell in love with. Christmas Day, I started making fangs. I sat my mom down in my living room and I said, "Mom, I'm a dental technician. I got these fangs. Girls love it. I'd rather make fangs for strippers than old people, you know?" So I made my mom a pair of fangs, and they look like crap. And then it was pretty much history ever since. I started running parties at Limelight, dropped out of the gaming thing, because the gaming and all this math and stuff that you can do. Get rid of the rules, open a club, and make fangs. Okay, that's a good life. All right, and I did it. We ran this huge party with like 3,000 people on a Tuesday night. I mean, I just remember the cash machine going. I'm like, okay, this is my destiny. And I took that money and I opened a shop. And
In New York?
Yeah, a fang shop called Sabretooth Emporium. And this lady calls me up, named Kitty Boots. She calls me and she goes, "The Empress of New York would like an audience with you." And so I went to this, in the meatpacking district, to this old diner. And in the back of the diner was, this like the dragon lady things in Chinatown with like the little beads. There's a bar called Hell, and I opened it up and I sit there, and there's this lady with long blonde hair and like a corset and smoking a long cigarette. And she goes, and before I went in, they're like, "Before you speak to the Empress," I mean, they geared it up, they amped it up, and they were like, "The Empress has a business proposal for you." The Empress is sitting there smoking a cigarette. I'm like, she goes, "Hello, I'm Chichi Valente." And I'm just like, this is too cool. So we sat down. She goes, "I heard about your parties. I'd very much like you to host an event the second Wednesday of every month starting in March at my new club called Mother." And I was like, okay. Well, opening night, Blondie shows up and the Spice Girls and like all this stuff. It's a little club.
We owned a nightclub in New York for years called Mother, and Father Todd and I met about 10 years ago, and I approached him about doing a weekly vampire night at the club called Long Black Veil, and with a small lounge in the other room called the Vampire Lounge. And Johnny built a coffin, which was an important accoutrement, and it was an extraordinary journey that we all went on together.
And it was just like anybody who was anybody of the vampire scene came to this club. It was like the underground vampire club, and we would then do the quarterly big event, and then this every month, this little thing.
Well, when we had the club, it would be very much about a courtly bow as a greeting, and we never, in the 3.5 years that we did that weekly club, we never had to call security inside the club. There may have been sort of psychic mind battles, but there were never actual fist fights or anything like that. So it's an amazingly civilized crowd in every way, and I think you really see that tonight at the ball.
So are you part of the subculture?
I guess I'm part of the subculture. Yep. If there's an underground seedy club in your neighborhood, I'm probably playing there at some point this year. You know how it is.
What are some of the themes in the things that you write?
I guess, love, loss, boy meets girl, boy kills girl, things like that. I don't know. You have to listen.
Normal stuff.
A little, yeah, normal stuff.
Well, there's many different traditions of vampirism.
Okay.
I was at Limelight and I started making fangs. So a lot of these people came and got fangs. So I got exposed to the whole vampire subculture by meeting each person for an hour while I made them fangs. And I was like, and it was amazing the diversity of people. I mean, rich, poor, old, young, gay, straight, Catholic. And a lot of people call their fangsmiths fathers. So that's why I went by Father Sebastian.
Oh, is that why?
It has nothing to do with being a priest or anything like that.
Okay.
I mean, I am ordained, but I am not, the father does not designate that I'm a priest.
So you joined a house once you, you can't.
No, I did join, actually, I founded the first house.
You founded it.
Yeah, it was called Shahaja. I've since retired from that because the clans, the house structures, I found to be contradictory to my vision of vampirism.
I am also a vampire and I have my own house in Chicago.
So what do you do with your house?
We get together and discuss, metaphysical issues and basically why we are the way we are. We're kind of a little bit of a different creatures where we feed off of different energies through osmosis and find a way to work that into our everyday lives.
A lot of people go to me, well, how can you be a Christian and a vampire? And I go, well, vampire is a species. It's kind of like, a lot of people talk about the Sangreal and the Holy Grail and everything like that. It's not a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing. It's something in your soul that's different. Mm-hmm. It's my body is a human being, okay? But there's something different about my soul that's different from other people. It is genetic.
Vampire is just an archetype, it's a terminology. So it's not something, it's like I'm not a vampire, I'm not immortal, I can die. But the idea of needing something else outside of you in order to sustain yourself, that's the vampire archetype. Blood drinkers versus energy vampires. I actually used to be a blood drinker years and years ago, but it's very risky. It's not a smart thing to do. I don't recommend it.
But the concept of vampirism is about life, a love and a passionate existence. And it is a species versus a religion. But someone would ask me, is vampirism a religion? You can say yes and no. Okay, you can have a Christian vampire, you can have a Jewish vampire, a Buddhist vampire, but when it comes down to the perspective, they are in agreement on things.
We tend to be a little more vocal because we want to represent ourselves in a positive way and kind of like, vanquish misconceptions about who we are and what we do. It's like, this is who we are, so, we don't want to scare you, we're not trying to hurt you, we want to understand and just be cool with it.
I really liked the creatures of the night I had met so far. I decided to search for more vampires in the places where the dead tend to hang out.
Yes, this is a 14,000 square foot, 3-level building, built back in 1923, and it was an actual working mortuary for over 80 years. And now it's a haunted house and ghost tours.
So what's the vampire connection with this place?
The vampire connection, our haunted house, we concocted a story behind it, that the embalmer one day was embalming a new corpse and noticed that it was becoming a vampire. And because he was intrigued by that, he took the life force or the blood from the vampire and began to do experiments. His experiments are now all the monsters that you see when you enter the haunted mortuary.
Right now they're having ghost expeditions that's going on. It's been certified actively haunted by the ISPR, which is the International Society for Paranormal Research, and there's currently 9 entities within the building. So it's a haunted house within a haunted house.
Different things happen all the time. Lots of people will hear footsteps and whispers, doors opening and closing, whereas there are no doors anymore because the place was gutted a few years ago.
Have you seen anything?
I have. I've seen the little boy Daniel several times.
Little ghost boy?
Little ghost boy, around 6 years old.
And we're doing the Ravencroft mortuary. We're doing the mortuary as the master being a vampire.
Greetings, foolish trespasser, to Ravencroft mortuary.
Alphabet God have been instructing you.
The energy here is so different. Our dead are raised above the ground, so you're confronted with it every day, whether you like it or not. And people here have embraced it instead of turning away from it. So I think the embracing of spirituality and of death in general makes this a completely different place, and a good place to come if you're looking for something a little out of the ordinary.
I'm here at San Luis Cemetery number 1. It's the oldest existing cemetery in New Orleans, established by royal decree in 1789. I found no mention of vampires in this Catholic cemetery, but I did find the tomb of Marie Laveau, the famous 19th century Vaudou queen of New Orleans. People mark X's all over her tomb in the hopes that she'll grant them a wish, and they also leave gifts: money, jewelry, candles. These are actually called oven tombs. For obvious reasons, they look like pizza baking ovens. Now, if you didn't have a society tomb or a family tomb, then you'd be buried in one of these community tombs. So they would put your coffin inside. It would stay there for a year and a day, long enough for your body to desiccate. It would be taken out. Then they would take the remains, shove them to the back of the tomb, thus making way for an entirely new coffin. Ew. The visibility of the dead makes New Orleans a primary place to think about the afterlife and the vibrantly undead. What else is it about this city that makes people see it as a vampire haven?
Vampires like to live in cities where the nights are long, and so New Orleans is a perfect place for a vampire shop. Anywhere that people can, be out all night and not have to be afraid of short nights.
It's a haunted place. It really is. I mean, every house has its ghosts, and we're very famous for that.
So ghosts and vampires are on an equidistant kind
I would say, because they're just haunting the whole place, and so do the vampires. They lurk in the darkness.
Do you think that there's a particular connection between New Orleans and vampires?
Definitely.
Absolutely. There are a lot of stories about unusual murders that happened in New Orleans that are connected with vampirism. I've always been interested in vampire lore, and it always seems to originate in New Orleans.
Well, New Orleans is New Orleans, and it's got its what we call an egregore. A corporation would be an egregore. It's something that doesn't exist but does. It's a collective will, group mind, something about that. And the history and Anne Rice and all that stuff is part of the glamour of New Orleans. And look at these walls. We're in the French Quarter right now, and this is beautiful.
It is.
And the vampire and New Orleans are a perfect marriage. And I think Anne Rice was brilliant in that concept.
So it's an aesthetic thing, really.
It's aesthetic and spiritual. New Orleans has its own consciousness.
It's feeling. It has a definite weight when you come to the city. It's different than anywhere else. It's sort of, relaxed a little bit. Time kind of slows down a little bit. You don't care so much about the rat race. You're just here. You can enjoy it.
Well, there's a lot of history here. Last time we played here, which was, last year, we went on the donkey ride thing, the ghost tour or whatever it is, and the driver was telling us about all the vampire stories. And he had no idea who we were, but he opted to tell us all the vampire stories. So there seems to be a rich history here of vampire culture. So,
of course, if you go on the vampire tours, you hear about the cathedral and everything, and also about the convent that may have started some of the whole vampire stories around. So it's always really cool to walk around the city and do some of those tours.
Oh, I feel the same way after taking the vampire tours, finding out that there are actual police records of vampirism. You have to kind of believe in them.
I decided to seek out the professionals.
Well, haunted history tours
became an entity out of necessity. I mean, New Orleans is considered the most haunted city in the country. And all the stories are true. That's what makes it so disturbing. We don't make this stuff up. Our city's history is strange enough. We don't have to fictionalize it. But the vampire tour we started almost right after we began the ghost tour.
Why?
You know, because New Orleans is not only considered the most haunted city, it's also considered the most vampiric. For whatever reason, vampire people tend to congregate in New Orleans.
Okay.
The vampire tour takes people to sites connected with actual vampire type crimes, killings. Call them serial killings or what? Unexplained killings. They were taken from police records, city archives, people's diaries, interviews. It's all real. I mean, tourism went down the tubes after Katrina. Katrina didn't kill this city. The national media killed this city. People were convinced long after the water went down that we were still underwater, that we were a toxic waste dump.
Yep.
And once we were able to convince people that we were not underwater and that we're not a toxic waste dump, then we became the murder capital of the world. None of this is true. We need tourism in the city. The city thrives on tourism. Before Katrina, we had over a $5 billion a year tourism industry. And after Katrina, it went down to zero.
Many vampire enthusiasts mention the effects of Katrina on their lives.
I remember when I came here after Katrina, it was just like, it looked like a sterile doctor's office. You know, that energy of like being sterile and kind of like depressed. But nothing, there was no emotion, there was nothing in it. It was just like, you know, the Katrina just wiped everything clean. And it's just a tragedy. And now I can see it coming back.
I'm sorry, we opened 4 years ago, and we were still open after the hurricane. We actually took everything out of the shop after the hurricane because there was nobody here, and we made it a haunted house, just for the locals, just to make some fun because everybody was so depressed. The economy here was so bad that we ended up having to close the shop, and now we just reopened last week.
We didn't have a party in 2005 because of the rain, the hurricane, and it wiped everybody out. The water came up over my gutters. It was 10.5 feet. At least that's what they say, you know, but I can see the water line in Lakeview, right by the 17th Street Canal.
So it flooded.
It was gone, yeah, pretty much, yeah. This has been such a journey for me for the last 2 years, and to come to this point.
Now, are you going to get back into a house soon?
Yes, maybe by Thanksgiving. My house is being built on my lot now, so it's actually progressing.
So how have you found the whole process in terms of government help and all of that?
Well, I don't want to go into it too much, but I didn't get a lot of help.
I mean, this storm did not play favorites. It ruined many lives. This is on my roof where they were, when they were lowered down, actually on my roof, talking to Adele. A lot of people left the city. I mean, New Orleans is still considered, like I said, a vampire hangout. Your tour guide tonight might be a vampire. You might be surrounded by vampires. They're all over.
Our friends came here a couple years ago and they said the vampire one was the one to do. Yeah. They were so scared that they even slept with beads and everything else to keep themselves safe around their necks.
So it wasn't cheesy. It was more about facts. It was more about it's sort of factual fiction, but it seemed like actual history, not just what you read about. The fangs sinking in the neck.
So you believe in vampires?
You know what? After taking this tour, I almost do.
My name is Sid. I am not your tour guide tonight. However, you're in luck because Jonathan is, and he's phenomenal. Say hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Jonathan. Oh, that was weak. He's new. I need to make sure you understand the kind of tour we're going to be going on, because absolutely what we're going on is nothing like a Halloween spook house. Okay, nobody's jumping out with masks and knives to try and frighten you on the way. If that actually did happen, though, literally over centuries, we've gotten a French phrase to describe that kind of occurrence. We now call that a mugging. Now, this tour is a 2-hour walking tour that takes you to the end of the city that as visitors you're the least likely to see. We're going downriver. Downriver is the oldest, darkest, quietest end of the city. It's the part that's least changed by time, which is pretty cool. Because when you're walking up and down the streets downriver, you have an idea of what it's like to actually live in New Orleans. And that's worth experiencing. But quite honestly, some of the strangest and really most unpleasant things ever in the city's history have happened in that direction. most savage murders, vicious tortures, a little cannibalism for light comedy relief. So, ladies and gentlemen, somebody tell me something you know about vampires.
They're sexy.
Let me tell you this. That is a very good thing to say. It actually is very pertinent. Everybody knows the idea of the vampire being a sexy beast, right? The guys all look like Brad Pitt, the girls all look like Kate Beckinsale in PVC. But that, like most folklore, comes from something much more grim. Much more grim, much more gritty. The actual folklore, vampires, this is real. Vampires like sex almost as much as they need blood. They will go home for it first off. But the folklore speaks very clearly. The vampire's rising, it goes home, and if it gets there, it has expectations of you. And how are you going to stop them? And that's not so sexy. But it is the origin of the vampire as the sexy beast. That's where it comes from. What else do you know?
Kill them with a stake in the heart.
Sunlight and steak. Sunlight has no effect on vampires. I mean, they don't need a floppy hat or SPF protection. You know what really would be the worst thing ever to hear from a vampire? There you are. I lost you in the dark for a second. Wouldn't that be a drag? Because that's all it's going to do is make sure they can find you. But keep in mind this. Almost everything you know about vampires is wrong. Let's go into the dark now. The last of the three buildings has survived the fires. The last of our original French buildings is behind me. It's the oldest one, too. This building very possibly is the oldest building in a third of North America. Begun around 1745. The building behind me in the original French is called La Couvent des Ursulines, which is much cooler than the translation of the Ursuline Convent, and it's the most important Catholic building in the south of the United States. And all that's really cool, but none of that's why we're here. We're here because this is the building I promised you at the beginning, the building from which all the vampire folklore in the south starts. It's the attic of a Catholic convent. How cool is that? Only in New Orleans could you have vampires trapped in splintering coffins for more than 250 years in an attic of a convent. The city was founded in 1718 by the French. Very quickly they realized two things. The first, nobody wants to live in a swamp. The second, the prisons of Paris were very full. And they solved both problems by going to the prisons and saying, "Gentlemen, you can lend your chains and rot, and you will, or I can free you, I can pay you, I can give you all the liquor you can drink. In exchange, you go to the New Orleans, bid me a colony in the swamp. I will not lie to you, you're probably going to die. What do you say?" And it may be my big French nose and I'm just channeling ancestors, but I'm thinking, I will die in these chains. But I could die in the swamp. But if I die in the swamp, I die drunk, so I pick B. Très simple, right? Thousands of men over time took that option and got out of the shackles and came here and began building La Nouvelle Orléans. A message was sent to France saying, "We need women for our settlers." New posters were printed up under the direct control of John Law, and they were brilliant because they were visual to appeal to people who couldn't read a word. And they would show beautiful cobblestone streets and stately mansions. And gentlemen in the foreground of the picture, in their finest clothes, walking sticks, inner arm's length, and just strolling the boulevard of a completely fictitious New Orleans. And the poster would say something like, "Gentlemen farmers of France," which meant peasants, "send your daughters to the New World. We have rich and successful gentlemen in the beautiful city of New Orleans that need wives." It went on to explain that the Indians of this area apparently loved the Frenchmen so much they would serve them for free, which is creepy if you think about the fact that many of the Indians here were cannibals. And my favorite lie was that after every heavy rain, the banks of the Mississippi are just covered in gold and gems and pearls, and we need more hands to pick it up. Hundreds of girls between 13 and 17 boarded ships and waved goodbye and vanished into the west, never to be seen again. In our history, these women are called les filles de cassette, which is very simply French for the casket girls. They're called casket girls because the French court did issue each woman a box to bring with them from Europe. A box we could easily call a distressingly familiar size. This is history, and no one to this day knows for sure what was in the boxes. And the girls didn't get here because their last stop on the way was Mobile. Mobile, Alabama was a French colony at the time called Mobile. And it was filled with men who didn't have any women either. So when a ship of teenage girls pulled into the port of Mobile for the last stop to New Orleans, what do you think happened? But the ship, even though the women had gotten off in Mobile, came as it was supposed to New Orleans, the last stop on its journey. But imagine how quiet it felt when instead of girls with rosy cheeks and ready for love, these men spy boxes of a distressingly familiar size being unloaded and laid in gleaming rows along the levee for God and everyone to look at. Let me tell you 3 things these men know are facts, okay? Number 1, coffins are not luxury items and you don't import them. You cannot send an empty box across the Atlantic, it's too expensive. To make it even weirder, agents of the Catholic Church arrived and took responsibility for the boxes. They packed them up and began shipping them around to the city to people that they consider reliable to keep them until they should be called for. Death and fear. The death rate begins climbing. No more Indians attacking, knife fights, or epidemics. No more men die, and more men seem to vanish from day to day. And after a year, this reaches a point where men just crack. And they watch as the boxes are gathered and dragged from the streets of the city and placed in the attic of the building behind me. And at that point, the attic you're looking at enters the legends, folklore, history, and mysteries of New Orleans. And no matter what you believe, you must agree with me on this. That is a hell of a lot better story than George Washington slept here. Isn't that? That's folklore with meat on it. And that's good. Isn't that cool? And now you understand the idea of vampires trapped in the attic. 250 odd years in running. Vampires really don't change that much.
Yeah.
They really don't. I mean, we have the Sumerians and the oldest written words of mankind talking about vampires and warning them. And the vampires they're talking about are pretty much the same vampires we're talking about today. It's unusual. It's interesting. I mean, 6 of 7 continents have vampire legends native to them. So when the Europeans arrived in Australia and the New World, they found vampire legends. So what does that mean? It means it's possibly mankind's oldest folklore. Common folklore. I was always a very, very spooky child. I played off as a joke in the tour. I mean, I literally remember being 4 years old and sitting at church with my grandmother, with my feet dangling over the edge of the pew, and thinking, I can hardly wait till church is over so I can skip Sunday school and hang out in the graveyard. I wouldn't be as good as what I'm talking about if there weren't things here that make me really... There are things that only the tour guides talk about, only amongst each other, and only when we're really drinking a lot. And what I told you that happened to me was the least of them. Things that cannot be explained, except for in certain ways that we are best equipped to, and we don't like to talk about that. And that's the kind of city we're in. Things happen down at this end of the city. They do. They always have. If you'd ask me straight up, I would say there's something really wrong with the city. The Indians told the French, no matter what you do, don't build a city here, you'll regret it. And the French said, we are not superstitious, we are Catholics. And so they built a city.
You love it here.
You know why, though? The dead.
Jonathan savors the darkness of the vampire figure. Vampire literature and folklore are so diverse that there is something in the image that can attract anyone.
Well, I think the vampire maybe represents a figure that's outside of the whole cycle of sort of money, death, celebrity, any of it, you know, that stands really outside of that and can be that kind of heroic figure that's not tied into the time that they're living in. And I think that's really, really appealing to people.
I think that most people associate vampires with romance, education, culture, sophistication, elegance.
I think the romance, the mystique, the charm, you know, living forever, never getting sick, you know, being up all night. I think it's great.
I just like the romantic part of it. It's awfully cool. Very cool.
I think girls are sexy with fangs. I mean, I can't turn that down. You know, I've got a fang fetish. You know.
There's something very sensual about the idea of being bitten on the neck, you know, while, you know. I don't want to be very graphic, but you know.
Unless, are there real vampires?
I believe so. I believe so. Every story comes from something that really happened. There has to be a backbone to the stories. They don't just pop up.
The backbone could be metaphorical. I mean, no.
I think.
Do you see anything anachronistic about, you know, this is a really dark creature and they can bite you and they can kill you and you're making them oh so romantic and sexy?
That's the best kind. Immortal bad boys? Urgh.